There's this old saying that poor people can't afford to buy cheap things. And if that sounds backwards to you, you're about to have your mind blown. Because what I'm going to show you is how the cheapest option almost always ends up being the most expensive choice you could make. And this isn't just about money, it's about time, stress, opportunity, and the hidden costs that keep people trapped in a cycle of poverty. My name is Mike, and I spend way too much time analyzing consumer behavior, hidden costs, and why some people seem to get more value from their money while others constantly feel like they're getting ripped off. If you've ever bought something cheap only to replace it 3 times in a year, or wondered why that great deal ended up costing you way more than you expected, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you see the true cost of cheap. Let's start with the example that explains this entire concept perfectly. Boots. There's this theory called the Sam Vimes boots theory of economic unfairness, and it goes like this. A poor man can only afford boots that cost $50. These boots last maybe 1 year before they fall apart. So, over 10 years, he spends $500 on boots. A rich man can afford to spend $200 on a pair of quality boots that last 10 years. Over the same period, the rich man spends $200 while the poor man spends $500. Same time period, same basic need, but the poor person pays more than double. Not because they're stupid or bad with money, but because they couldn't afford the upfront cost of quality. This is the fundamental trap of being poor. You end up paying more for everything because you can't afford to pay less. And this pattern repeats across every category of spending you can imagine. Let's talk about cars. Because this is where the cheap equals expensive trap becomes absolutely brutal. Someone with limited money buys a $3,000 used car. It seems like a smart financial move, paying cash, avoiding debt. But here's what actually happens. That $3,000 car needs $800 in repairs within the first 3 months, then another $600 6 months later. Then it dies completely and needs a $2,000 transmission, 2 years in. They've spent $6,400 on a car that's now worthless. Meanwhile, someone with more money spends $12,000 on a reliable used Honda or Toyota that's been well maintained. Over those same 2 years, they spend maybe $500 on basic maintenance. Their total cost is $12,500, and they still have a car worth $9,000. The person who tried to save money by buying cheap actually spent more and has nothing to show for it. But it gets worse, because while the cheap car was breaking down, the poor person was missing work, paying for taxes or Ubers, dealing with the stress of unreliable transportation, adding even more hidden costs that never show up in the initial calculation. The cheap car didn't just cost more money. It cost opportunities, time, and peace of mind. Let's talk about appliances. Someone buys a $300 refrigerator from a discount store because that's what they can afford. It breaks down after 3 years. So they buy another $300 refrigerator, which lasts another 3 years. Over 15 years, they've bought 5 refrigerators for $1,500 total. Someone else spends $1,200 on a quality refrigerator that lasts 15 years with minimal maintenance. Same 15 years, same basic need. But the person who bought cheap spent $300 more and dealt with the hassle of replacing a refrigerator 5 times. Including the cost of their time, the food that's spoiled during each breakdown, and the stress of unexpected expenses. This pattern shows up everywhere. Cheap furniture that falls apart and needs replacing. Cheap clothes that wear out after a few washes. Cheap tools that break when you actually need them. Cheap electronics that die right after the warranty expires. Every time you buy cheap, you're often just renting the item until it breaks and you have to buy it again. Here's where it gets psychological. When you're broke, you're forced to think short-term. You can't afford to spend $200 on boots even though you know it would save money in the long run. Because right now, today, you only have $50 and you need boots. The long-term optimal choice is literally not available to you. This forces you into a pattern of short-term decisions that cost more over time. Rich people can afford to think long-term. They can make the upfront investment that pays off later. They can buy quality once instead of buying cheap multiple times. This isn't because they're smarter or more disciplined. It's because they have the capital to make better choices. Money enables good decisions, Lack of money forces bad ones. Let's talk about food. Because this is where the cheap equals expensive trap affects your health, not just your wallet. Someone with limited money buys cheap processed food because it's what they can afford. A box of mac and cheese costs $1. A bag of chips costs $2. Fast food value meals cost $5. They're getting calories, but not nutrition over time. This cheap food leads to health problems. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, now they're paying for medications, doctor visits, missing work due to illness. That cheap food is now costing thousands in medical bills and lost income. The true cost of cheap food isn't the price tag. It's your health and everything that follows from it. Meanwhile, someone with more money buys fresh vegetables. Lean proteins, quality ingredients, they spend more on groceries up front, but they're investing in their health. They have more energy, fewer sick days, lower medical costs. The expensive food is actually cheaper when you calculate the total cost. Let's talk about housing. This is probably the biggest example of how being poor is expensive. Someone with bad credit and no savings has to rent month to month. They're paying $1,200 per month, or $14,400 per year over 10 years. That's $144,000 with nothing to show for it. No equity, no tax benefits, no control over their housing costs. Someone with good credit and savings buys a modest house with a mortgage. Their payment might be similar. Maybe $1,300 per month, but over 10 years, they've built up $50,000 in equity. They've gotten tax deductions, and they have an appreciating asset. The person who saved money by renting actually paid way more when you factor in the opportunity cost. This extends to everything about housing. The renter can't paint the walls or make improvements that would add value. They're at the mercy of landlords who can raise rent at any time. They might have to move frequently, paying moving costs and deposits. Being unable to afford homeownership keeps you paying more forever. Here's another brutal example. Banking, poor people pay to access their own money. Check cashing fees, ATM fees, overdraft fees, monthly maintenance fees, prepaid debit card fees. Someone living to paycheck might pay $50 per month in various banking fees. That's $600 per year just for the privilege of having less money. Rich people don't pay banking fees. They have accounts with minimum balances that waive fees. They use in-network ATMs. They never overdraft. They're not paying $600 per year to access their money. In fact, they're earning interest on their money. The system literally pays them while charging poor people. Let's talk about insurance. Someone with bad credit and limited money gets quoted $250 per month for car insurance because they're considered high risk. That's $3,000 per year. Someone with good credit and a stable financial history gets quoted $120 per month for the same coverage. That's $1,440 per year, same car, same coverage. But the poor person pays double just because they're poor. And they're more likely to let insurance lapse to save money, which leads to even higher rates and potential legal problems. The same pattern happens with health insurance. Someone who can't afford comprehensive insurance either goes uninsured or buys a cheap plan with a huge deductible. They avoid going to the doctor for preventive care because of the cost. Then a small problem becomes a big problem. Now they're facing a $10,000 emergency room bill that could have been prevented with a $150 checkup. Being uninsured or underinsured is incredibly expensive. Here's something most people don't think about. Energy costs. Someone renting an old apartment with poor insulation and old appliances might pay $200 per month in utilities. Someone in a newer, energy-efficient home pays $100 per month for a larger space, over a year. The person in the cheap apartment pays $1,200 more just to be less comfortable. Being poor means living in less efficient housing, which costs more to heat, cool, and power. Let's talk about transportation beyond just the car itself. Someone who can't afford a reliable car takes public transportation. Sounds cheap, right? But their commute takes twice as long. They can't take certain jobs because the bus doesn't go there. They spend extra on taxes when they need to go somewhere off the bus route. They waste hours every week that could be spent working or with family. The time cost is enormous. If your commute takes an extra hour each way because you're on public transit, that's 10 hours per week. Over a year, that's 500 hours. If your time is worth even $15 per hour in potential earning or quality of life, that cheap transportation option is costing you $7,500 per year in opportunity cost. Here's something about buying in bulk. Rich people can buy the 48-pack of toilet paper at Costco for $50 per roll. Poor people buy the single 4-pack at the corner store for $100 per roll. Same product, but the poor person pays double. And this applies to everything: food, household products, personal care items. The wealthy can take advantage of bulk pricing and sales. The poor have to buy small quantities at premium prices. This extends to every aspect of shopping. Someone with money can wait for a sale, stock up when prices are low. Buy quality items secondhand from rich people. Someone without money has to buy what they need when they need it at whatever price it is. No waiting for sales, no bulk discounts, no opportunity to buy used quality instead of new junk. Let's talk about education and skills. Someone who can't afford to invest in themselves gets stuck in low-paying jobs. They want to take a certification course that costs $500 and would boost their income by $10,000 per year. But they don't have $500. So they stay stuck earning less over 5 years. That's $50,000 in lost income because they couldn't afford a $500 course. Rich people invest heavily in education, training, certifications, coaching. They understand that investing in skills pays returns forever. They can afford to take a career risk or go back to school because they have savings to fall back on. Poor people can't afford these investments, so they stay trapped in low-skill, low-wage work. Here's something about subscriptions and contracts. Someone with bad credit can't get approved for a normal cell phone plan, so they use prepaid plans that cost $60 per month. Someone with good credit gets a contract plan for $40 per month. Over 2 years, the poor person pays $480 more for worse service. Being poor means paying more for the same services. This extends to everything with credit checks, utilities, rental cars, hotel rooms, even job applications in some industries. Having bad credit or no credit history means paying deposits, higher rates, and sometimes being denied altogether. Each of these costs more money, which makes it harder to improve your situation. Let's talk about the time-money trade-off. Poor people spend time to save money because they don't have money to save time. They'll drive 30 minutes out of their way to save $5 on groceries. They'll spend hours fixing something themselves instead of paying someone. They'll take the slow, cheap option for everything. Rich people pay to save time because they understand that time is more valuable than money. They'll pay for grocery delivery, they'll hire professionals for repairs. They'll take the fast option even if it costs more. Their time is worth more than the money saved. So the expensive option is actually cheaper when you factor in opportunity cost. Here's the brutal math. If you're poor and you spend 3 hours to save $20, you're valuing your time at $667 per hour. If you could spend those 3 hours learning a skill, working a side job, or even just resting so you perform better at work, that $20 savings might actually be costing you money. Let's talk about the poverty premium. This is the term for how poor people pay more for everything. Higher interest rates on loans, higher insurance premiums, higher rent relative to home values, fees for basic services, inability to buy in bulk. Having to buy cheap items that break, this premium compounds over time, making it nearly impossible to escape poverty. Research shows that low-income Americans pay about 9% more for everyday goods and services than middle-class Americans. 9% might not sound like much, but when you're already struggling, that 9% is the difference between making it and not making it. The system is literally designed to extract more money from people who have less. Here's something about financing. Poor people finance everything at terrible rates because they have no other option. That $500 TV becomes $1,500 when you buy it on a rent-to-own plan. That $25,000 car becomes $45,000 when you finance it at 18% interest over 7 years. Everything costs more when you're poor because you're always borrowing at the worst possible terms. Rich people either pay cash or borrow at low rates. They use 0% financing offers. They have access to home equity lines at 4%. They understand leverage and use debt strategically. Meanwhile, poor people are paying 20%, 30%, 400% interest just to access basic goods. Let's talk about the stress cost. Being poor isn't just expensive financially. It's expensive mentally and physically. The stress of constantly worrying about money, juggling bills, dealing with things breaking down. This stress leads to poor decision-making, health problems, relationship issues. The cost of this stress is impossible to calculate, but it's real and substantial. Rich people have the mental bandwidth to make good decisions because they're not in constant crisis mode. They can think long-term, they can be strategic. They can take calculated risks. Poor people are stuck in survival mode, just trying to make it through the week. This cognitive load makes it nearly impossible to break the cycle. Here's the solution, and it's not easy. You have to find a way to break the cycle of buying cheap. Even if it means saving up longer, even if it means going without temporarily, you need to get to a point where you can afford quality. Start small. Maybe it's one quality pair of shoes instead of cheap shoes every few months. Maybe it's a reliable used car instead of the cheapest car on the lot. Each time you choose quality over cheap, you're making an investment, you're breaking the cycle, you're keeping more money in your pocket long term. It won't happen overnight, but gradually, you can shift from constantly replacing cheap items to owning quality items that last. The other part of the solution is increasing income. Because sometimes the problem isn't that you're buying cheap. It's that cheap is all you can afford. Focus on skills that increase your earning power. Look for opportunities to make more money. Every extra dollar you earn gives you more options to choose quality over cheap. Here's the hard truth. The system is designed to keep poor people poor. Every aspect of modern commerce extracts more money from people who have less. The solution isn't to blame poor people for buying cheap. It's to understand that being poor is expensive and requires systemic change. But on an individual level, the best thing you can do is understand the true cost of cheap. Factor in replacement costs, time costs, opportunity costs, health costs. Sometimes the expensive option is actually the frugal choice. Sometimes spending more saves money, so here's your challenge. The next time you're about to buy something cheap, stop and ask yourself, what is this really going to cost me? Not just the price tag, but the total lifetime cost. Will I have to replace it? Will it break at an inconvenient time? Will it cost me opportunities or health? If you can afford to spend more for quality, do it. If you can't right now, make a plan to save up for quality instead of buying cheap multiple times. Break the cycle, one purchase at a time, because being cheap isn't the same as being frugal. Being frugal means getting the most value for your money. Being cheap means paying more in the long run while thinking you're saving. The difference between cheap and frugal is the difference between staying poor and building wealth. Choose wisely. Your future self will thank you.